Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan has condemned India's restrictions on the commemoration of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's birth anniversary in occupied Kashmir. The Foreign Office said Indian occupation forces blocked all the roads leading to Hazrat Bal Shrine in Srinagar. It said the restrictions violate Kashmiri's freedom of religion. Islamabad urged the United Nations to take notice of India's oppressive actions. 9 million Kashmiris have been under India's lockdown and communication blackout since the 5th of August. The continuous lockdown has resulted in a severe shortage of food and medicine in the valley. To snub dissent against the court verdict on the Babri Mosque case, New Delhi has imposed occupied Kashmir-like restrictions in India's Muslim-majority cities. Yesterday, the Indian Supreme Court handed the disputed land of Babri Mosque to Hindus in a highly controversial verdict. The Indian government has deployed an additional 5,000 troops in Ayodhya, 15,000 in Bengaluru, and thousands in other cities. The government has shut down the internet in Jaipur to curb dissenting voices in the country. The authorities have also shut down educational institutions in many cities. The All India Muslim Personal Law Board has rejected the verdict, announcing that it will file a review petition. The New York Times has published an op-ed series of animations exposing Indian atrocities in occupied Kashmir. It depicts the trauma of a Kashmiri experiencing New Delhi's clampdown in the valley. The caricatures explain the sentiments of Kashmiris when India revoked the valley's special status and imposed a curfew, cutting it from the rest of the world. They depict the horrors of Indian military raids on the Kashmiri houses, ransacking homes and abducting young boys without reason. They tell how many youngsters ran and hid in the fields to avoid arrest and torture. The caricatures show the Indian forces torture young boys by hanging them upside down, flogging and electrocuting. The sketches also describe the anguish felt by women after being cut from their families. They also tell the story of a marriage under curfew with no celebration and amid protests. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is a role model for everyone in the world. Addressing a conference in Islamabad, Khan said Pakistan will become a great nation only by treading the Prophet's path. He said Malaysia and Turkey have decided to jointly create films depicting great Islamic leaders in order to familiarize our population with our history. Khan urged Islamic scholars to guide the government in transforming the country on the basis of State of Medina. He said accountability is most important under Islamic model. He said everyone, especially youngsters, must adopt the lifestyle mandated by Islam and the Prophet, peace be upon him. Khan said he will develop Pakistan on the principles of the State of Medina by providing justice and basic necessities to every citizen. Iraqi protesters have continued their anti-government sit-ins following a deadly crackdown by security forces. 7 more protesters were shot dead and 80 others wounded in Baghdad and the southern city of Basra. This brings the death toll to over 280 since the protests against corruption and unemployment began last month. Medics say 3 demonstrators died from bullet wounds and a 4th was killed when a tear gas canister pierced his skull. 3 more protesters were killed and dozens other wounded in southern Basra city. The United Nations says it is receiving daily reports of killings, kidnappings, beatings and intimidation of protesters. The Amnesty International has warned that the deadly protests could turn into a bloodbath. 5 Syrian government soldiers have been killed by Turkish-led troops after intense clashes broke out in northeast Syria. State media says 26 others were injured in the fighting. It adds the Syrian army has taken control of the Shuaf, a village in the Ras Al Ain area. Earlier President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey will not leave Syria until other countries pull out. Erdogan said Ankara will continue its battle against Kurdish fighters until all of them have left the region. Israeli forces have wounded 71 Palestinians in a protest against illegal settlements at the Gaza border. Medics say the victims sustained bullet wounds and tear gas burns. Over 6,000 Palestinians on the Gaza Strip participated in the protest. Since March 2018, Palestinians have been holding a weekly march of return protests at the border. Meanwhile, Israeli occupation forces arrested 2 Palestinians. According to Palestine Prisoners Society, nearly 6,000 Palestinians, including women and children, are languishing in Israeli jails. President Hassan Rouhani says Iran has discovered a new oil field with estimated reserves of 53 billion barrels. Speaking at an event in Yazd City, he said Tehran has disappointed enemies with its economic growth despite sanctions. Iran's non-oil exports are on the rise in the face of unilateral and illegal curbs by the US.
We have discovered an oil field with 53 billion barrels. This is a huge oil field stretching from Bostan to the Omdeh region, 2,400 square kilometers wide. This oil layer is 80 meters deep and its accessible oil reserve is 53 billion barrels.
Iran has rejected reports that the International Atomic Energy Agency found traces of uranium at one of its sites. On Wednesday, the UN's nuclear watchdog claimed it found traces at an unnamed site in Iran. Foreign Ministry spokesman Abbas Mousavi said IAEA's findings are a trap for Tehran. Mousavi said Iran is hopeful that watchdog will maintain its vigilance. Earlier, the Foreign Ministry said Russia and China are the only countries keeping it from abandoning the 2015 nuclear deal. It said Tehran is still implementing the deal despite Washington's economic terrorism. The ministry added that if the US sanctions are not lifted, Iran will have no choice other than to abandon the pact. In Hong Kong, clashes between police and protesters have erupted for the 24th consecutive weekend. Protesters have blocked roads and trashed shopping malls across the city. They also vandalized a train station in the central new town of Sha Tin. Police used tear gas to disperse the demonstrators. China's Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office says governance in semi-autonomous city must be improved. Hong Kong has been rocked by protests since June when the government introduced a controversial extradition bill. Though the bill has been withdrawn, anger is still simmering among the locals. Kabul says it has killed the Taliban commander responsible for the death of 3 Afghan judges in an ambush on Thursday. The defense ministry said Awasuddin was killed in an airstrike by Afghan forces in central Logar province without providing further details. In a series of tweets, the ministry claimed killing 25 Taliban in an airstrike across Afghanistan. The ministry said it has also destroyed and captured Taliban weapon caches during the operations. The Taliban have neither confirmed nor refuted Kabul's statements. Afghanistan's chief executive Abdullah has boycotted the recount of the presidential polls. In a statement, his party, the National Coalition of Afghanistan, asked its observers to avoid the process across the country. The party said it is pointless to start recounting without sorting out fraudulent votes first. It alleged that there are over 300,000 fraudulent votes that will not be accepted under any circumstances. This comes after the Independent Election Commission asked all the observers to attempt the recounting as early as possible. The result of the presidential polls was set to be announced on 19th of October, but has been delayed further. Ankara is observing the 81st death anniversary of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, founder of the Republic of Turkey. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan attended the ceremony at Anıt Kabir, the mausoleum of Atatürk in the capital Ankara. Speaking at the occasion, Erdogan said Atatürk was the commander-in-chief of the War of Independence. He paid a rich tribute to the first president and said he will remain a symbol of esteemed honor. Atatürk died on 10th of November 1938 at his official residence in Istanbul. South Korea says the US is very actively trying to persuade North Korea to resume denuclearization talks. The statement came after Pyongyang threatened to abandon the denuclearization process, accusing the US of non-serious behavior. National Security Advisor Chung Hui-yong said Seoul is taking Pyongyang's December deadline very seriously. Earlier, North Korea said the window of opportunity for progress in dialogue with the US is getting smaller. North Korea's Foreign Ministry's representative Jo Sol-soo said sanctions on Pyongyang are an unacceptable insult. In April, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un gave the US a year-end deadline to show more flexibility and warned it not to ignore that date. The US will host NATO chief next week to review Washington's agenda of raising defense spending and equitable burden sharing. Despite growing tensions between the US and NATO, President Trump has been pressing NATO to pay more for their defense. The White House says President Trump will meet NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on 14th of November. The meeting comes ahead of a NATO summit in London on 3rd and 4th of December. Stoltenberg will also meet US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and members of Congress. Earlier this week, French President Emmanuel Macron warned NATO of Washington's lack of predictability under Trump. German Chancellor Angela Merkel rejected the view, calling NATO indispensable. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indus News. Welcome back. Bolivia's President Evo Morales has agreed to hold a new presidential election amid allegations of irregularities in the 20th October vote. The announcement comes after weeks of anti-government protests. Speaking to media in La Paz, Morales also pledged to replace members of the country's election board. The president said he made the decision to reduce tensions himself. The Organization of American States, which monitored the elections, had called for the result to be annulled. Meanwhile, opposition candidate Carlos Mesa says Morales should not be a candidate in the new election. Spain is voting in its fourth general election in as many years to break the political deadlock after a fractured coalition. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez announced fresh polls in September after failing to form a government. Sanchez's Socialist and Pablo Casado's People's Party are the parties poised to take first two positions in today's elections. Opinion polls show the Socialists are leading but likely to win slightly fewer seats than in April. It shows the People's Party will be stronger and the far-right Vox Party can become Spain's third largest party. Meanwhile, Catalan separatists are protesting and calling for the release of 9 Catalan leaders who were jailed on election eve. The government has sent additional security forces to the region to make sure today's election is not disrupted. Romania is set to choose its new president today in a highly contested election. This year's election has been overshadowed by a political crisis that saw a minority government installed just days ago. Opinion polls show incumbent center-right president Klaus Iohannis ahead with around 40% of the votes. It shows the center-left candidate and former Prime Minister Viorica Dăncilă at second position with 22%. Dăncilă's Social Democrat government was forced to step down after losing a no-confidence vote last month. If no candidate wins more than 50% of the votes today, there will be a second round of voting on 24th of November. Congo's military says it has killed 25 ISIS militants over the past 10 days in the country's eastern regions. Operation in charge General Jacques Nduru said 7 soldiers have also died since the campaign began on 30th of October. Nduru said the army has seized 4 ISIS positions around the eastern city of Beni in North Kivu province. The ADF group linked with the ISIS has been operating along the Congo-Uganda border for more than 2 decades. Congo is also battling a recent outbreak of Ebola. Regular militant attacks have hampered efforts to contain Ebola across the area. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 37,000 residents of Zongo city are stranded in floods. Authorities say more than 5,000 homes have been affected. They say heavy rains flooded the Ubangi River in northeastern DR Congo, which caused the disaster. The government says thousands of children are among those trapped without potable water, medicine and food. Rain-triggered disasters have killed and displaced hundreds across the East African region this year. The Australian government has warned a catastrophic fire is threatening its largest city, Sydney, and the surrounding areas. More than 100 blazes are still raging across New South Wales and Queensland. Firefighters from New Zealand were flown in to help douse the fire. Authorities advised residents in vulnerable areas to seek shelter in shopping centres. Australia is suffering one of its worst bushfire seasons, which started before the Southern Hemisphere summer. Six people have died after Cyclone Bulbul hit the area between the Sagar Islands of Indian West Bengal and the Kepapara region in Bangladesh. The authorities said over 2 million people have been evacuated from coastal towns in both the countries. The authorities said one person was killed by an uprooted tree in Kolkata and another by a collapsed wall in India's Odisha state. In India, 60,000 were evacuated while over 2 million moved to cyclone shelters. Dhaka Met Department said the cyclone is weakening with 150 kilometers per hour winds. In India, people are suffering from respiratory diseases as a thick blanket of smog continues to engulf the capital city of New Delhi. Authorities sprinkled water on the city roads, hoping it will help reduce the particulate matter in the air. A public health emergency has already been declared as the air quality index dips to this year's worst levels earlier this week. The situation was exacerbated after farmers in the states of Punjab and Haryana set fire to the paddy stubble in their fields. NASA has unveiled its first all-electric experimental aircraft in the California desert. Adapted from Italian-made model, the X-57 Maxwell has been under development since 2015 and will take a year to test its first flight. More in this report.
After attaching 2 of the 14 electric motors powered by specially designed batteries, NASA deemed that Maxwell is ready for its first public preview. This is the latest aircraft the National Aeronautics and Space Administration has developed over many decades. A newly built simulator allows engineers and pilots to get the feel of the finished version of the X-57.
It's very exciting for us. I know for me and Tim Williams, the other pilot's going to be flying it. For Armstrong to be getting back into the crewed X-plane work is very exciting for us.
NASA X-57 venture includes standards for airworthiness, safety, as well as for energy efficiency and noise.
So there's a number of interesting new markets for electric airplanes. The first one's called urban air mobility, and there's many companies trying to get into this area. So if you think of like an air taxi, imagine a taxi, but in 3D, a vehicle that can lift off the ground and take you around a big city, say 20 to 50 to 100 miles.
One challenge is improving battery technology to store more energy. Due to limitations, the aircraft is envisioned for use in short-haul flights as a commuter plane.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indus. US President Donald Trump says trade talks with China are moving along very nicely. Trump said the United States will only make a deal with Beijing if it is the right deal for America. But speaking at the Joint Base Andrews, Trump said the talks have moved more slowly than he expects. President Trump added that China's supply chain is all broken like an egg and Beijing is desperate to make a deal. The US President said there have been incorrect reporting about his willingness to lift tariffs. He said reports regarding the level and amount of tariffs lifted are incorrect. Credit rating agency Moodys has warned it might cut its rating on Britain's sovereign debt again due to high borrowing levels and the Brexit paralysis. It is in a toughly worded statement. Moodys said Brexit's effects on Britain's socio-political outlook will be long-lasting. It said Britain's nearly £2 trillion of public debt, which is 80% of the annual economic output, risks rising again. Both of the main political parties have promised big spending increases ahead of next month's election. Moodys stripped the country of its AAA rating in 2013 and downgraded it again in 2017. And now the weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.